Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Maureen O'Connor from Quilters Heaven in Northbrook, Illinois, and I am the Opinionated Quilter. Today's episode, number 39, is the anatomy of a scrap quilt. You all have overwhelmingly voted for scrap quilts and we're going to deliver today. But before we get to that, let's get to my opinion. This is a follow-up to our foundation paper piecing trimmer we did for quick Christmas gifts. And I showed you a very simple pattern. And if you recall, I said these are such simple shapes, I'm not rough cutting them to the particular shape of the piece. But now, as you get to more complicated foundation paper piecing patterns, the key to success, in my opinion, is to stay organized and do all the proper prep work. The first thing is when you have a more complicated pattern such as this one. This is the candy cane from Mary Hertel's book. She has 3 different sections, A, B, and C. And so they're all together in the book. So after you take a photo of or copy of the original pattern, before you put it onto the paper that you're going to actually foundation piece on, you want to separate them. Cut the 3 pieces apart, separate them, and then copy them. So you have space in between so that you have a 1/4 inch seam allowance space. Now, one thing that I didn't mention that's super important is when you are rough cutting your pieces, you need to place your foundation paper pattern face down. So besides cutting these pieces apart to copy, I also make a copy and cut each piece apart so that I have a pattern to rough cut larger than. I've got an A bag, I have a B bag, I have a C bag. So I took the C bag to show you as an example. This is piece 1C, which is here. But now remember, this is face up where you're going to be sewing, but you're actually going to be placing your fabric on this side. So if you notice, the candy cane curves this way on the picture, but after you make it, it curves this way. So this is my C piece over here. If I want my fabric to be in the correct direction, it has to be face down to fit. That's face up of the fabric. So when you're rough cutting, be sure you put your pattern piece face down on the fabric. Then I just take a ruler. Let's see. I think I would rather have that way. And then I just line up a 1/2 inch and I cut. And I go around. And it's nice to have one of these rotating mats because then I can just rotate around without moving the piece. And I just do a 1/2 inch all the way around. And now my angles are all set so that when I put the piece onto the foundation, it's in the right direction. You won't have problems with these kind of triangles here because it doesn't much matter because it's still a triangle any way you look at it. It's these pieces here where they're non-symmetrical that will give you fits if you don't cut them in the right direction. So I hope this helps with your foundation paper piecing. They're quite fun to do. I hope you enjoy them, and I hope you learned something from this. Let's go ahead and get to today's episode. There are so many options for scrap quilts. I've divided them into 3 categories. One is cutting all the same shape. Next is taking the same block and making many of them. Then the last, which is a little bit more difficult, is taking a pattern that is for planned fabric and converting it to a scrap quilt. So let's start with cutting all the same shape. Obviously, you can do squares. Super easy, showed you squares many times before. Another option would be like this, which is rectangles, and this is cut 5 by 2.5. So it works with charm squares and also layer cakes, 10-inch squares. And you can really do it any way you like it. You can do columns like I did, or you could do horizontal if you like. You could do one row horizontal and the next blocks vertical, whatever you like. Just take fabric that goes together that you like, cut them up and sew them together. Another option is wedge pieces, and you've seen this before. We started with 5-inch squares for this one, and you can really use any wedge shape you like. This is an 18-degree wedge, and that's what we used for this one. But you could take any 18, 22.5. This is a 36-degree wedge. This is a 30-degree wedge. Just take your pile of fabric and cut them up. Here's one that's a much fatter piece. People call this maybe a tumbler rather than a wedge, but these are also cut from 5-inch squares. So you can really take any single shape you like and cut them up. Just take things that you like together. Another option is braids, and in braids you really have two methods of construction. One is cutting the pieces precisely. Now this angle could be any angle you want, but typically it would be a 60-degree cut or a 45-degree cut. And in this case, the pieces are cut precisely. And I started with 2.5-inch strips, and you just cut them. And let me show you. If you have a 2.5-inch strip, you would just take whatever size ruler you want to use, and you would cut. And then depending on how big a piece you want, so say I want mine here, I would put markers on this so that I don't cut in the wrong spot. You just flip across. I don't think I'm high enough here. There we go. I should have marked it. And then you just keep going, cut, 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 and you get all your pieces cut across. And then there's essentially no waste. Now, the other method, which is a little bit easier and faster, is you just cut the length that you want, whether it's a 5-inch piece or a 6-inch piece or even longer. You just cut all the pieces the same length. You generally start with a triangle and sew your first piece on. Then you sew your next piece, and you just keep on going until your length of your column is as long as you want it to be. Then you have all these jagged edges. And if you recall in our episode of the Genius Ideas, Megan from, why can I not all of a sudden remember? Tiny Orchard Quilts, excuse me, sorry about that. Tiny Orchard Quilts took these pieces and sewed them together. If you don't want to do that, typically what people do is they just trim this off to a certain width so that all your columns are the same width. So there's so many options in single cuts. You don't even have to do for machine piecing. You could cut clamshell pieces, shaped pieces, and hand stitch them. So whatever shape you like, cut all your pieces up, sew them together, you've got a scrap quilt. Let's move on to the blocks now. Another option is to make one block over and over again. What block will you make? The possibilities are endless. You can look at books. I've shown these books before that have all kinds of different blocks in them. I have this old version of this block tool that has all different blocks in it. You could make a zillion flying geese. You could make pinwheels. You could make whatever block you choose from your scraps and put them together. To me, it's an issue of cohesiveness. You either need some fabric that repeats or a color, like even if they're all whites, but different whites. But whatever you do, make as many blocks as you want and see what works to put them together. Here's a couple of examples. We've shown you this one before. This is actually two different blocks, but what it does is it makes it so you don't have to put any sashing, because you've got half the blocks have the black on the outside and half do not. So as long as you alternate them, the black gives you the cohesion, and the big benefit of this is no seams meet up. The only place you have to worry about is where your blocks come together. So this is a great scrap quilt. Another one we've shown you before, and this one is the one that Brenda from Mount Scrapmore calls her potato chip block. She used bigger pieces, and she did one more round after mine. My blocks are smaller, but this uses 1.5 inch pieces. So for using scraps, it's fantastic. The one thing again is cohesion. And we've said that before, that you don't have to use the same purple like I did. You could use all dark blues or all whites and have them be different ones. So you can make this thing all out of scraps if you like. You know, I can't even show you all the possibilities because they're just way, way, way too many. Here's one we've shown you before as well. All this is this is your block. It's a half square triangle of white and then half square triangle of the blue. And I just made blocks and put them together and put them into a barn raising setting in a log cabin variation. Here's I said pinwheels before. All this is pinwheels, all scraps. But unlike this quilt back here that had the black framing on alternate blocks, this one we needed to put in sashing and cornerstones to separate the blocks. But again, this is 2.5 inch strips, which I know all of you have a gazillion of, and you can just put pairs together that you like and make pinwheels. So again, the possibilities are endless. Pick a block you like and make them from your scraps, and you'll have a scrap quilt in no time. The last one is the hardest one. There are some patterns that will never work. For instance, my Light in the Valley quilt that is behind me at the front table where we started today, that would be absolutely impossible to do with scraps. It has to be planned and the fabrics have to be the same. But let's show you some options that do work. Lastly, you can take a pattern and make it scrap. It won't give you the same effect as a planned fabric quilt, but you can do it, and if you like it, that's all that matters. Here is a traditional 3-color hunter star. Very defined points, very defined colors. Here's our scrap version. Truly a little wild. It is growing on me, but it's almost hard to believe that this is the same pattern as that. They're the same pieces, just with multi-colors instead of just the 3 colors. Another thing you can do is keep the colors the same in their position, if that makes any sense. Megan just did a Irish chain from scraps, and to make the chain work, you have to have one color to make the chain, but it doesn't have to be the same fabric as long as it's the same color. So if you keep your colors the same in the position of the quilt, it would work differently than how this one works, where the color is not at all the same, is just totally wild. So you need to look at the pattern that you're thinking about doing and saying, do I want to keep my colors the same in the pattern, just different fabrics? Or do I want to just throw all my scraps in and see what happens? Some things will work, some not so much. But the fun is trying, the fun is exploring, the fun is using your scraps that are just sitting in a pile over to the side anyways and not doing anything. And the one thing you can always be sure of, and we've talked about this before, is even if you don't care for that particular piece, someone will. Everybody's tastes are different. And so you may not care for something, and the next person who sees it will say, that's the most beautiful quilt I've ever seen. So don't be discouraged if things don't work out exactly the way that you think they will. I can't tell you how many times it's happened to me, but I don't stop sewing. I keep using my scraps. I keep trying, keep coming up with new ideas. I encourage you all to do the same. Enjoy your scraps. Have fun. If you got something out of this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, happy sewing.